This video is a follow-up to a previous video where I asked if commercial space stations are in trouble. Check out the video for details, but in summary, the issues I raised were the many NASA requirements these commercial space stations need to meet. This increases the cost and complexity of these projects, which can only result in the providers charging high fees to cover their costs and achieve a return on investment. Another concern I raised is how much funding these commercial space stations will receive, and how many awards will NASA grant. Too many and the fixed pot of money will be spread too thinly. Too few and many of the projects will not succeed without NASA as an anchor tenant. However, this new video offers a different perspective. It appears that NASA is actively addressing these challenges, potentially paving the way for a more promising future for commercial space stations. Okay, let's check out the new developments in NASA's Commercial Space Station program. NASA update on Phase 2 certification of commercial space stations. NASA has recently released a document with updates on Phase 2 of the CLD program, that's Commercial LEO Destinations, which provides more detail on their strategy for transitioning from the International Space Station to a post-ISS era where commercial stations will serve NASA. NASA has now delayed its requirement for continuously hosting 2 astronauts in low Earth orbit from 2030 to 2031. Also, NASA's Deputy Administrator Pam Melroy indicated that they might redefine what continuous presence means, focusing more on capability rather than constant habitation. NASA is now considering an evolutionary approach to the capabilities that commercial space stations must provide. This means that not all requirements need to be met from the start. Instead, they can be added gradually over time. This change reduces the initial burden on commercial companies, allowing them to launch their stations earlier and start earning revenue from NASA and other clients sooner. This is a welcome change, as it will go some way to making these commercial projects more viable. Many of the NASA requirements aren't necessary for non-NASA customers, particularly high net worth tourists who might only wish to spend some time in orbit, snap a few photos, and not engage in complex scientific activities. Another major change is that initially, NASA will provide transportation for all missions associated with NASA services, including crew and cargo missions. NASA will directly contract transportation providers like SpaceX for crew and cargo Dragon services and Northrop Grumman for Cygnus spacecraft operations. This will massively reduce the burden on commercial space stations. Originally, NASA wanted an end-to-end service, meaning NASA bought a ticket and the commercial companies were responsible for all other costs, including transportation to and from the space station. For example, with a $55 million seat on Crew Dragon, sending 2 NASA astronauts would cost $110 million, not including the additional expenses for cargo support missions. From NASA's budget, we know that maintaining the International Space Station costs $1.3 billion annually, with an additional $1.8 billion spent on crew and cargo missions. If this cost ratio holds for commercial operations, more than 50% of the expenses are tied to transportation services. This temporary measure, if implemented, would dramatically cut costs for commercial space stations. However, it's worth noting that this is only a provisional solution. NASA's long-term goal is still to have an end-to-end service, and this aspect remains, quote, to be determined. NASA is suggesting MIN-IOC, or Minimum Initial Operating Capability, by December 2029, where a short-term presence of 2 NASA crew members for 1 to 3 months would be acceptable. Shorter missions reduce the need for frequent cargo missions, making operations cheaper. Pushing back the initial operating date from 2028 to December 2029 gives commercial operators more time to design, construct, and launch their space stations. And the lower requirements suggest NASA will accept lower capability to begin with. We don't really know what that means. NASA will need to decide what features it can live without, at least initially. For instance, an external robot arm or crew airlock for EVAs could be deferred. Or some of the scientific equipment that NASA would like could be added at a later date. These measures reduce the financial burden on companies and allow them to start receiving revenue not just from NASA but from non-NASA customers sooner. NASA is now prepared to offer more support and services to commercial space stations than initially intended. They are currently determining which specific services or equipment they will provide. This could potentially include scientific equipment like 3D printers, pressure chambers, facilities for microgravity research and biopharma labs. Other equipment might encompass fitness gear, life support systems, and various other operational systems. For services, NASA could extend its telecommunications support, using its network of orbiting satellites and ground stations to aid commercial space stations. With more than 20 years of experience in on-orbit operations, NASA could supply significant expertise, support, services, and equipment to accelerate the development of commercial offerings, helping these stations achieve minimal operational viability as quickly as possible. In summary, the commercial LEO destinations update from NASA is positive. NASA has clearly been listening to feedback from companies who want to provide space stations to NASA. NASA is currently funding Axiom Space, Blue Origin, and Starlab. In addition, NASA has unfunded agreements for commercial space capabilities with Sierra Space, SpaceX, and Vast Space. All of these companies could potentially offer viable commercial space stations to NASA in the coming years. It will be interesting to see what happens in 2025. Big changes are likely to happen with the new NASA administrator that could potentially benefit commercial providers. Let's hope a number of these commercial space stations launch and achieve commercial success. Check out my videos on Vast Space, Axiom changes to its space station plans, and Starlab. I plan to cover Sierra Space's life habitat, which I suspect they plan to deploy independently and not as part of the Orbital Reef Station. They have recently been raising funds and forming partnerships, and with their Dream Chaser vehicle are quite capable of operating a commercial space station on their own. Anyway, that's another video. We'll continue to update you on developments in commercial space stations. Be sure to like and subscribe so you will see our upcoming videos. We make videos every week covering the space industry, with an emphasis on the smaller space startups that aren't covered so well on other channels. See you soon.